Hi guys. Today we'll be talking about functions, why we would need them, and how to declare a function, function parameters, and how to call a function. So basically, over time, I've been talking about calling methods and functions. I think I have I've made reference to them a couple of times, and it's one of the very important features of programming, right? So a function pretty much is just you can see it as a container, right? That houses your code that you intend to use over and over again. So the essence is you use a function when you have this set of code, that you intend to use over and over again, and you don't necessarily have to write it the normal way we do, which is you come here and declare it in line one, maybe line 1 to 7 or so. So you can just house them in a function and then call them. And when you go further in your programming journey, you see how you can write code in one file and load it into another file and use it. And that is where the power functions actually come in. So it might still not make sense to you. I mean, a lot of people find it difficult to wrap their minds or their head around around what a function is, but it's something that practice would actually help. So, and I think when you see me use it, it might actually make more sense to you. So to get started, what am I going to do? Okay, so I've told you what a function is. It's a container. It houses code, and then you call the function, and then it would execute the code you had written within it, and it does whatever it's supposed to do. So one of the things you have to understand is a function would usually return something. I would practicalize all these things. So it returns something, or okay, pretty much it does something, and one of the things it can do is to return a value, right? So let's say you have a function that takes in an array of let me say people's names, and then you want each time you pass it that array of people's names, it's supposed to check for anyone's name that starts with A, and then it returns that person's name for you, right? Now, if you were to do this without a function, if you were to do this, without a function, you would probably write your code, and then at some point you have an if condition that checks and all that, right? And then if I want you to do it like for 5 different persons, you would have to copy and paste those lines of code, right? And that goes against one of the core concepts of programming called the drive principle, which is you don't repeat yourself. So with a function, you can just declare a function, and what it does is it takes an array, it checks if that array, if any of the names in the array starts with, let's say, the alphabet A, and if it does, it returns true. So what you can simply do is you can just call that function 5 times, right, and pass a different arrays, and it will return what the result it's supposed to return for you. So that method or that use case of a function is what helps you stay in line with the drive principle, and at the same time it helps you uh, reuse your code, and most importantly it keeps your work organized, because most times you write programs and you could come back months or even years after, and if it's well organized, it's easy to pick up, right? Another thing is you would not be the only person going through your code. It's practically impossible. So some other person would come and it helps organize your work better. Um, I really want to show you like a practical sense of how you can write a function in one place and report it, but it's going to complicate things for you. So for now, I believe we're just going to work with the basics. So let's start with how to declare a function. So there are two ways to declare a function. You can either give it what we call a param or argument, which uh, would look somewhat like this if it has a param, and without a param, it's just empty. So how do you create a function? There are two ways. The first way is by using this method, right? And this is the second way. It's the newer way of doing it, and it's called the ES6 method way of writing a function. But they both do the same thing, but it's just for I don't know, it's just I won't call it syntax, it's just style. right? And this is actually easy on the eye. I actually prefer this. So we are going to, for the course of this work, stick to this arrow functions as they are called. They're called arrow functions. So I just wanted you to know, because if you go through like some old tutorials online, or probably even new ones, some persons would actually use this method, right? And I think if you're coming from, okay, Python uses def, it doesn't use function. So this is just the keyword that lets your JavaScript know, oh, this is a function you're about to create. So we are going to get rid of this because we're not using. I'm used to the arrow functions. But either way, it would work. So how do you create a function? First of all, you have to create a variable, right? That would point to that function, right? Remember, I told you variables can hold anything. They can hold integers, they can hold strings, they can hold arrays, and of course, they can hold functions, right? So the main thing a variable does is it's like a reference to something you've allotted to it, right? But in the case of a function, when you want to use that variable or that function, you call the function, and unless you call the function, it doesn't execute. And of course, what I'm saying might not make sense until you see it. So let's do something simple. So let's create a function. Probably it will make sense if you see me type it. So let me do it again. So const. You can give it any name you want. So I prefer my arrow func equals. So the first thing is your parenthesis, right? Which is where you would put your parameters, if any. And then the second thing is your arrow, which is the equal sign and the less than sign together. So it looks like an arrow, actually. And then your curly braces. So this would be the block, right? Where you have your, within which you have your code that would be executed each time you call this function. So let's say for now we just want to console.log Tony, which is my name. So rather than coming here and do console.log Tony, which is actually stressful, I could just come here and do my arrow func. Now, let me show you something. If I run this code, it runs, but nothing happens. And probably, but he said he's supposed to call the function. And if you remember what I said before, call a function or call a method, you always use the parentheses, right? And now you can see it's telling you void here. And this simply means the function is returning nothing, right? So void is not a bad thing. It's just saying, oh, this is a function, you call it, but do not expect it to return something to you. It's actually going to do something, but it's not going to return anything. And in the second, I'll show you how we can return things. And it's quite simple. You just use the return keyword. But for now, let's just keep it simple and run this function. And if I run it, you can see we have Tony here, right? Just like what I told you to do. But let's say we want to do something complex. Let's say we wanted to do if 5 is not, this is not complex, but let's say if 5 is less than 6, console.log Tony, of which we know 5 is less. So 5 is greater than 6. So that won't run because obviously 5 is not greater than 6. So else, I don't know, log, I don't know, condition was not met. This doesn't make sense, but it's just a way of showing you can do whatever you want within a function, right? Now, let's say, let me just go back to keeping it simple. Going back, going back. Okay. So let's say we wanted to, okay, so let's say now I want to console my name, which is Tony. So I do this again and I see Tony, right? But let me tell you now, it's looking a bit funny. But now the problem with this is each time I want to, what if I wanted to console the log Jennifer or something, or Cynthia, right? I'd have to come here and type Cynthia. And what if I wanted to do this like 5 times with 5 different people's names? It means I don't even know how this is going to work. So whenever you need to dynamically do things, right? What I mean by that is you don't know what the user is going to pass, the value or the arguments the user is going to pass, but you do know what you want to do with it, right? So let's say in this case, this function, all I want you to do is, let me make it more reasonable. Print names func. So that's what it does. It just prints a name, print name func, right? So now I just want you to print a name. So I don't know the name you're going to pass, but all I want to do is whenever you call that function, it's going to print out your name for you, right? That is what I know my function does. And the way it's supposed to work is somehow I'm supposed to get whatever you put and then print it out back to you as your name, right? So one way we could do this, let me just delete this so that I can just use this, is to simply come here and just type in name, username. So anything you want to, you could even call it X, you could call it whatever you want to call it. Sorry, do not separate them with spaces. So username, user balance, whatever you want to give it, but let's just keep it simple. It should be the names you give your parameters, right? Should be such that they make sense. So if someone looks at this code, the person will know that, oh, this is a function that prints names and it takes in the parameter username, right? So if I should come here, all I have to do is just console.log username. And now the beauty of this is if I just come here and put Tony, put Kai, I'm so lazy, and put John, and put Sam, and put Mary, right? And I run this. Oh my God, sorry, I made a mistake. I'm calling my arrow func when I've changed the name to print name func. So fix that, clear my output. And if I run the code, you can see Tony, John, Sam, Mary, right? And you can see this is way cleaner than if I had to come here and do console.log. Like the old way I would have done this would have been to do something like this. Tony, then John, then Sam, you get the idea, Mary. If I should run this, you can see they do the same thing. Let's make this. Let me divide them so that you can see. Now you can see they do the same thing. But you can see the stress I had to go through here, right? And the beauty of this is I can reuse this code. I can extend this code. I can add more checks to it, which we will do shortly, right? So to quickly do a recap, this is what we call a parameter, and you pass it in here, and it's see like a variable kind of, yeah, just because it holds data, right? Which it's mapped, so it's mapped to whatever you give to it here. So if we come here and let's say we wanted to print in the user's name, and let's say our salutation is hello. What you can see it's giving me an error because that's not how you construct your function. So let's just call this salutation. Salutation, right? So I could just come here and use string interpolations, which we've done before. And I could say, okay, dollar sign, come here. So whatever salutation the person wants to use, right? We're going to use that and salute or greet the user. If I come here and I run this code, you would see it has undefined, 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 because obviously um, we did not provide for. We said sorry, when we declared the function, right? What we did was we declared it in a way that we're going to take in two arguments. But when we decided to call the function, we only provided one argument. So what happened is it's going to see this salutation. Remember, we're doing salutation here, we're calling it here, but we've not given salutation an argument. So an argument is whatever you pass to a function when you're calling it, right? So we've not given it the second argument, which is supposed to be the salutation, right? So we could just come here and say hello, Tony, or let's even make this. I'm going to Nigerianize this, right? So for my Nigerian friends watching this, so let's say Tony is Hausa. So let's call him let's call him Abdul. right? Let's call this person Yoruba. Let's call him Tunde. Let's call this lady, she's Igbo. Let's call her Ngozi. Oh, these are Nigerian names, by the way. And what name? Let's say the person is French. We can call him, I don't know, I don't know French names. Let's just call him, what's the French president? Jesus Christ. I forget this guy's name. Thank God for Google. And before I type it, I'm very sure the name is going to come to my head. I'm closing my eyes. French President Macron. Ha! Can I forget Macron? I didn't look. Macron. So let's say the person's name is Macron. Right? Now, the old way you would have done this is console.log Abdul, comma this and other, but with a function, it just makes it so easy. You could just have a dynamic way. Remember, I used the word dynamic earlier of greeting each of these persons, right? So remember, this function is no longer printing names, it's greeting people. So we can actually change it to be my greet function. And if you're wondering how I did this, right? If you double tap on the word and you do Control D, it highlights all the instances of that word, and you can just do a multi-line edit, right? And then you tap anywhere and it's gone, and you can break out of the multi-line editing. So let's say Tunde, Yoruba people, how do they say good morning? Ekaro, Eka, Ekaro. The Igbos, if I'm correct, say Igbo. I hope I'm correct. The French say bon- bonjour, and then my Hausa friends would actually say na. So yeah, so this is how I would greet in Hausa. This is how I would greet someone who is Yoruba. This is how I would greet someone who is Igbo. This is how I would greet someone who is French. And if I should run this code now, you can see Inakwana Abdul, Ekaro Tunde, Ibolaji Ngozi, and Bonjour Macron. Quite neat. And we're able to do this because we have two parameters. We know that the second parameter is always going to be the salutation, right? Which is Inakwana here. Meaning if we were to do this, you will see it would see Inakwana as Abdul's name and then Abdul as the greeting. So you can see Abdul Inakwana, which actually sounds correct. But you get the point. So we're going to do it the way it was before. Make take it back to the way it was before. So you just have to understand the order. There's no particular order basically. So you have parameters, right? And yeah, it's sequential, meaning the first argument is going to be the username, second argument is going to be the salutation, right? But then within your code block, you can swap it whichever way you want, right? You can use it. That the idea is just you can use whatever arguments are being fed to your function, right? As long as you made provisions for those arguments through your parameters here. So what's the use case we can use for this? So yeah, so we've declared a function. We've talked about function parameters, and then we're calling the function. So yeah, to call a function, like I said, is you use this parenthesis here, and then you pass in, if any, the argument, right? Right? Or if arguments and parameters are used interchangeably, just know that if the function has things within the bracket, right, it means it has um, parameters of which when you are calling the function, you can pass in the arguments. So it just depends on how you want to use it, but they both mean the same thing, kind of. So let's say we wanted to do something complex. This is actually quite not complex. Let's say we just wanted to take it up a notch. Let's say we wanted an array of users, and then we're going to loop through the users in the array, and if the person's name is not in that array of users, we're going to tell the person, hey, sorry, you're not You're not a member of our clique, right? So let's call it my clique funk, or not. Let's say my friends, right? And let's say this is for a party. So the first parameter, right? Remember I said it's going to be an array, so we can call this my friends, right? And then the second person could be the user, right? So now we have two arguments. So my friends is going to be an array, and the second parameter is going to be the person we're checking for. So one way we could do this is, first of all, let me make this much more easy for you. Oh, I had promised I was going to show you how to return. So let me quickly do that. Let's go back. So let's say we wanted to how you return, because right now if you hover over this function, you will see I'm pointing at my screen as if you can see it. You can see void here, right? Meaning the return type is it returns nothing. But what we can do is we can have it log something out and just return I am done. And now if we run this function, we should see in our corner Abdul. But if you wonder, okay, well, it said it returns something. So what is it returning? You can see here it has changed from void to string, meaning we are returning a string data type, right? If we were returning a number, you would see number here. If we're returning a boolean, and I think we're going to use the boolean for that problem of the checking if someone is among our friends. So yeah, you can see the bool. So let's make this let's just return something. I'm just going to return something, and I called it something. So now if I should send it, oh sorry, if I should if I should do this. All right, sorry guys, something came up. So I definitely know I can't remember what I was saying. What was I saying? Okay, yeah. So actually I can't remember, but I know I was trying to show you you could return something. So if I should run this code one more time, you can see Inakon Abdul, but see the catch here. I could actually grab whatever this function returns and store it in a variable called catch. Catch. I'm very bad with names. And now if I should log catcher, you see something quite interesting, which is something. And if I change this to laugh my ass out, how kids are not watching it. See, whatever I return can be assigned to this variable. So pretty much what is happening is when you call a function, right? That function is executed. And if the function returns something, then actually that thing is returned. I don't I don't know if that makes sense, right? But let's see. Let's say this is your variable, my hand. It's empty, right? And you've assigned it to this function, which is this call. And you've called the function, which is this cup. And for now, this cup is empty. Okay, I just poured water on myself. But it's empty. I turn it upside down. There's nothing, right? That is console.log. Console.log is void. There's no use case. You're just printing something else to the console, right? But let's say we want to return something from that function. So in that case, that thing they're returning is what I call something. So this is something. This paper has no use. So if I wrap this and put in this function, this one, right? Jesus Christ. So now, yes, we have a void or console.log salutation, right? This is my variable, which I call catcher, right? So it's on the left, this is on the right. All right? So this is my left and right. You get the point here. So this is my left, this is my right. And when I call the function, what happens is JavaScript is going to go into this cop, which is the function, and say, oh, We have console.log, it consoles the log, and I say, oh, you returned something, so it's going to return that thing, right, to my variable here, which is called catcher. And then catcher now has that something, which in this case is this paper, right? So pretty much, like I said, a function is a container. It could be void, as in this. Why am I spilling water all over my table? As in this case, there's nothing here, right? Or it could have something which it returns, which could be anything. In this case, it's a string called something. And then you could, when you assign it to a variable, right? Oh yeah, when you can assign the result of the execution of a function to a variable, and in this case, it only makes sense if you know that function returns something, right? So again, I call the function, it returns something, and then we're happy. So now you could still not understand why would you need something like that. So let's say you wanted to write a program that would only allow people that are on the guest list, right? Which is what happens if you were to build an app for a club or something, right? So what you want to do is if the person is on the guest list, right? If it is true that the person is on the guest list, then proceed to welcome the person. So how we could do that would be something like this. So outside we're going to have an array, and let's call it const guests equals, and we're going to have John, Mary, Sam, and my humble self, 20, right? And now we want a function that should just check guest, or let's call it the bouncer. That's what this function does. It's the bouncer, right? Those of you guys who have been to the club, you know who a bouncer is. So now we have guests, and we have the particular person we want to check if he's on the guest list, right? Right. So in our function, we'll say we're expecting guests, and then the name of the person, the guest name. So what this function is going to do is, if the person is on the guest list, then we are going to return true. Else we will return false. And then we are going to have a conditional outside the function that checks um, if that person is on the guest list. If not, we'll bounce the person. Else we'll tell the person you can come in. So this is how we're going to do it. First, we know we are dealing with an array, and because it's an array, you can actually look through items in an array. We've done this when we worked on arrays. So what we can do is we can actually have a for loop here. And we can use the for each, which might confuse you, but it's actually better. So let's use for each. So all this does is we're going to have take these guests here. Let's call this my guests, so it doesn't confuse you. My guests. So we're going to take these guests here. We know it's an array, right? And then we're going to so dot for each. What it just does is it picks each item in the array. So it's like a for loop, but it makes your life easy. So it's going to pick each item in the array and it does something with that item in the array. So in this case, we just want to log the element, right? So you can call it whatever. We could call it um, homies. I laugh at my own jokes. And we just want to console the log homies, right? And here's the kicker: we can actually, even though this function returns nothing, right? We can still do this. We can actually call this function and assign whatever it is to this variable catcher. And if I should run this, it will still run. Okay, my create func is not. What the hell is my problem? Bouncer. If I should run it, guess dot for each is not a function. Oh, sorry. So sorry. The first argument is supposed to be an array, which is my guest. Remember, my guest, if you hover around it, is this string. This just shows you it's an array of strings, right? This is what we have here. If I should make this, Yeah, so you can see it's an array of a string and a number. That's what it's technically telling you here, that this is an array that has strings and numbers. So, in case you were wondering. So we have my guest, which is this array here, this list. And for now, even though we're not implementing the logic yet, let's just put Tony here. If I should run this code, you can see John, Mary, Sam, Tony, which is what is happening here. It's printing out each of them. So remember, dot for each, you only call it on an array that has strings in it, right? So once you call dot for each, you have these homies, and you have I think I'm making this into complex for you guys. But you can actually look up um, for each. So let's just make it simple. You guys are capable. So pretty much for each takes in the, and if you notice, it looks like a function, which actually that is what it's kind of, right? So it takes in homies, which is each item in the array, right? We can call it whatever we want. So we could call it I, for example. And if you run it, it still works. It doesn't matter. It's just a placeholder, right? So we're saying for each item or for each thing in this array, I want to do this. So in this case, what I want to do is just console.log I. But again, this is not what I had introduced you guys to. So let me stop being wicked and do the right thing. So we're going to use our normal loop to implement this. I promised myself this video was going to be under 30 minutes, and somehow it's already 31 minutes. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to have a for loop. This looks familiar. And we're going to have index at 0, which is the first item, and then when if index is less than array.length, in this case, our guests is the array, and then what else? Yeah, and then so index is 0 if index is less than guest.length, which in this case should be 0, 1, 2, 4. Index plus plus, remember we have to increase or loop. So the element, which in this case is the person, right? Um, why do we even need a loop? Ah, Tony, we don't even need a loop. I've forgotten. Arrays have a dot includes method, so we could just check guest, and that's the beauty of programming. Guest dot includes. So it might not highlight it for you because it doesn't. Even though it's an array, right? It doesn't know at this point what guest is. That's your your VS Code, but we know it's an array, so we can use array method. So we can do dot includes, yeah, dot includes is one of them. So dot includes, so guest dot includes guest name. So we can just return this. So what we're technically doing is return, and in dot includes returns true or false, right? And it returns true if whatever you pass to it is included in that list, or false if whatever you pass to it is not included in that list. And now if I should run this code, you should see nothing. Exactly. Why? Because yeah, catcher is the what catcher is the result of the execution of this function, which the result of it is that it returns true or false, as you can see here. So um, I want to log catcher, and now if I run this code, you can see true. And why is it true? Because yeah, Tony is in my guest. What if I wanted to put Shade? Why is this true? Sorry, it's false. Aha, I was about to lose my mind. So it's false. Shade is not in my guests because she's not in this list here, right? So what we can do is what can we do? So yeah, so remember I said we check, and what we can now do is we go to the next part of the code, which is to have our if. So if bouncer. I'm going to log you not on the list. So let's say my guest is this, and then we have another variable called const guest. I'm terrible with names, sorry. Just naming my variables sometimes. So we're going to call the person Shadi. So we just have two variables outside, right? So now what we are going to do is we'll pass my guests and we're going to pass guest person. So this is just going to make our code much more. So if bouncer, that means the person is on the guest. So you are going to say you are on the list. I'm going to say welcome you on the list. And for now, you notice it's not working. Why? Because string interpolation to work, I have to use the backtick. So that is this here and this. So if this else, who the hell are you? Sorry. So who are you, right? And if I should run this code, you should see who are you. Why is it who are you? Let me clear the output first. Because we have our list, we have guest person Shadi. Now we have a function that takes in guests and guest name. The guest is supposed to be an array. The guest name is a string. That is how we want to design our function, right? So we always know that the first argument is an array, second argument is guess the string, right? So meaning if I should interchange this now, I would have a problem. Meaning if I came here, sorry, this is supposed to be guest person. So my guest person is Shadi. You can see it if you hover, and then my guest is my array of strings. But what if I came here and I did this, which you are most likely going to make this mistake. Let's say we interchanged it. Now we're going to have a big error. Why is it working? Why do strings have a dot includes method? Let me see. Oh, strings actually have dot includes. So it's actually looking if Shade includes an array, which defeats the purpose of what I'm trying to do. So let's say you mistakenly passed in a number. Now you are going to be in trouble. Yep. Guess dot includes is not a function. What pretty much what it's telling you is type error, meaning the functionality you're trying to expect or you're expecting from this data type, which in this case is an integer or a number, right? It doesn't have that functionality. I mean, numbers don't have dot includes. It's usually strings or arrays, which makes sense because strings are made up of characters, arrays are made up of items, so they should be able to check if whatever you are looking for is included in what they contain. So we're going to go back. So it's just a way of making you know that the placing of your arguments could actually cause issues for you. So we're going to do the right thing, which is always we know in declaring our function, first argument is array, second argument is a string. We're going to check if that string is included in the array. So if I run this code one more time, you would see who are you. And if I should change guest person to Tony and run this code, you would see welcome you on the list, Tony. If I change it to Mary, same thing. What if I change it to uppercase Mary? See? Remember I told you JavaScript is case sensitive. So Mary with an uppercase M is different from Mary with a lowercase m. So I think we've done justice, at least at the elementary stage or the beginner friendly stage to functions, right? And it's pretty much something that you have to practice and play with. And end of this bootcamp, I'll be sharing resources that could help you guys going forward. So thank you. Can I say thank you? Am I done? I should be done. Yeah. So to recap, we created a function. It takes in two parameters, a list and a string. It returns the result of calling this method, which returns true or false. We have an if condition that when we call this function, we know it's going to return something. So if what the function returns is true, then our if block runs, else our else block runs. So we don't actually need this catcher again. Or we could actually just call this user on list, guest on list. So guest on list. So the value of guest on list is going to be the result of calling this bouncer. So it sounds nice. So we are calling the bouncer. Hey bouncer, do we have this guest on list? The bouncer says true. That's what we assigned to this guest on list. So you can that's the beauty of programming. You can actually play with it the way I just did. So I pass guest on list. So if guest on list, you can see how the code is beginning to look more human friendly, right? So we have my guest, we have the guest person, we have a bouncer function. That's the function of a bouncer in the club to check if you're included in the guest list. So guest list equals the result of the bouncer checking the guest, checking if your name is included in the guests here, because the guest has that method. The guest is an array, so it has that dot includes method. And if you are, it returns true. So if guest on list, which is true or false, in this case, if it's true, if guest on list is true, then log this, else who are you? So I think that's that for functions, and I really hope it makes made a lot of sense to you guys. It could be quite tricky getting to wrap your head around it, but like I said, practice consistency, and as always, if you have any problem, drop a comment in the comment section below. That's if you're on my if you're watching this YouTube video. Or if you're in the bootcamp, as always, you can reach me on Slack, and I never slack. Can you believe I just did that? Have a nice day, guys.